I was hiking up this mountain thinking about World War II, as one does, and something occurred to me. I'll just take you through the whole train of thought here. It begins with season 2 of Peacemaker and how it really captures an aspect of the breakdown of the whole post-World War II mythology that I'm always on about. Let's see what the spice rack has for this one. So the big reveal is, spoiler warning, the idyllic parallel universe where everything is better is actually the evil Nazi-verse.
Fuck, how'd I miss that?
The twist really captures not only how the casting of Nazi Germany as a qualitatively different kind of evil from everything that has ever existed is breaking down, but also why some people are moving from curiosity about the truth of it to full-on embracing it, and why there's both good and danger in that. It shows us a nice, prosperous town, clean streets, polite people. Everyone seems well off, happy. Later, the show tells us that there are labor camps somewhere.
I mean, anything anyone has here is at the expense of those who are considered outsiders, forced to toil away in camps their entire lives. Well, that's whack.
But the closest we see to that is a caricature of irrational hyper-racism.
What got out? I'm black!
What?
It's typical over-the-top James Gunn stuff, and it gets the laughs. But there's something else here. You've probably heard at some point over the last few years people talking about whiteness as something that is pervasive, entails systemic racism, and/or must be dismantled. If you talk to the academics that came up with this, or go off the Cliff's Notes version that the Smithsonian had up, you find that in their ideological context, whiteness isn't about race so much as culture. That's why they can say things like, black white supremacist with a straight face. It's not about ethnicity, it's about Western civilizational norms. So yes, dismantling whiteness is explicitly about destroying Western civilization. But then a lot of ground-level progressive left minions embrace the idea, but treat it like it is about race. They in turn make a lot of noise and get the attention of their counterparts on the right, who see the whole thing as just anti-white racism, when it's actually a very nuanced academic jibber-jabber intersectional circle jerk, but at least it's internally consistent when you unpack their basket of assumptions. That's where calling normal things fascist comes in. Physical fitness, white people having kids, thinking laws should be enforced consistently. Peacemaker riffs hard on that with this depiction of traditional small-town America, but it's actually Nazi. A lot of people want to raise a family in a nice, friendly American town. And when you keep telling people that the things they want are fascist, some of them are going to decide that maybe they want fascism. And when you couple that with the twin narratives of Nazis being the most evilest thing ever, but also equating slightly right-of-center liberals with Nazis, well, it gets silly pretty fast. This comes up a bit more nuanced in another DC series, Pennyworth, chronicling the youth of Alfred Pennyworth, later Batman's butler. The Batman having a butler will always be kind of funny to me, as he gets in adventures in a wartime England set in a 20th century mashup of the 20s to the 60s woven through the setting. The villains, the Raven Society, are explicitly and self-described as fascists. Classic post-war villain shorthand stuff. Only everyone fighting them is worse. Their principal enemy, the No Name League, backed by the CIA, is trying to seize power. The League's leaders plot to assassinate each other using peace talks as cover. Peace talks that Francis Gaunt, leading the fascists, showed up for in good faith. With the exception of Pennyworth himself, the only characters that actually stick to their principles are Gaunt and James Harwood, the Raven Society leaders. The fascists come across as, if not the good guys, at least less bad guys by comparison, in part because it relies on the shorthand to carry the idea that they're the obvious villains, but it doesn't actually make them the obvious villains in action.
You will respect our ancient rights and liberties and stop this violence.
I could chalk this up entirely to the old World War II shorthand losing relevance, the zeitgeist pushing it in new directions before it fades into the background like all the big baddies before it. But as a once serious historian and current anti-authoritarian crank, I wonder if there's more going on. Not deliberately on the part of the writers of these shows, but deeper in the workings of the modern world. Entertainment has always had a layer of messaging to it, sometimes against those in power, and in the last century especially, very sophisticated behavioral conditioning by them, which raises questions about why refurbishing of quasi-Nazi ideas and general reframing is facilitated, whether through the platforming of revisionist history, Daryl Cooper being the one who gets most of the attention lately, but it goes back at least to David Irving. More overtly, there are popular right-wing media personalities like Nick Fuentes targeted towards young men specifically. The demographic that can, if organized, bring about massive and violent social change. If you're in power and you want to stay there, you need to have the young men of your society invested in the system that you're at the top of. Young white men are currently the demographic most acutely vilified and impeded by that system, so their anger, their power to bring about radical change, has to be misdirected and dissipated instead. Motive. Even if you think the old man's gone crazy, just hang with me for a bit and think this over at the end. There's a precedent we should consider. Currently, black Americans have by far the highest rate of out-of-wedlock births of any demographic, and also the highest rate of fatherless households by a wide margin, which in turn is often blamed in part for the high level of criminal activity among black youth. I know there are very real disparities in the justice system. Black boys are more likely to be tried as adults, more likely to be sentenced to prison than other demographics convicted of the same crimes. The disparities are real, but they are not solely the result of systemic racism either. There are real problems here stemming in part from the lack of stable families. And whether one puts most of the blame on welfare programs making it possible for a woman to raise kids without a man, the introduction of women into the workforce reducing employment opportunities for black men, cultural conditioning towards self-destructive behavior from the blaxploitation films of the 70s through the vacuous blingin' booty rap of today, or whatever else, the end result is that the black family has been largely destroyed, and with it the power of the black community to stand on its own and effect real change. Maybe this is an unfortunate unintended consequence of various policies intersecting since the 1960s. Our leaders are just staggeringly and consistently incompetent. Or maybe it was a deliberate attempt to neuter the political power of that demographic in the wake of the civil rights movement. Keep them dependent, controlled, and easily directed in whatever direction dissipates their energy and props up the system. So what if young men finding an affinity with Nazi Germany isn't a bug, but rather the whole and entire point? Not as a prelude to a white nationalist revival, but a way to sabotage the political potential of young white men and dissipate it. Because just like a black middle class could be a significant political force, a white middle class with a sense of collective identity and interests, even with the demographic shrinkage of recent decades, could still dictate the direction of this country. That possibility is undermined on all sides by unaffordable housing prices, hiring practices that systematically disadvantage young white men, the channeling of young women into hookup culture instead of looking for real partners, in turn skewing young men's perception of those women away from wanting to settle down with them. It's a multi-front erosion of the process that forms stable families. Again, it could be the intersectionality of staggering incompetence. Or it could be deliberately doing to the white middle class what was done to the black middle class before. There's a potential alliance there if all sides could set some of the bullshit aside. But given all these factors, the post-war mythology stretched to the breaking point. The telling young men, particularly young white men, that they need to bear the guilt for bad things their ancestors did while not being allowed to express any pride for the good things that those ancestors accomplished. Finding that they've been lied to about some of that history and naturally wondering what else has been distorted. Longing for something meaningful, something epic, and being offered slop, shame, and despair by essentially feminized institutions. If you've ever had a long meeting with the women in HR or one of those consider everyone's perspective struggle sessions when physics or finance is involved, you know. Whereas the whole Nazi image is built on a kind of assertive masculinity, brothers in a great struggle that is both appealing and seems like an alternative to what's on offer. And if you're a Skeksis trying to maintain power, channeling the angriest and most energetic young men into that path isolates them from everyone else. It makes alliances and coalitions nearly impossible and keeps their political power contained. Set up some front groups full of moles to soak up their tendency to organize, and the threat is effectively neutralized. Unless you do something staggeringly incompetent, like funnel them into an ideology and then try to draft them to fight in a war on behalf of the country that ideology is most critical of, that would be a dumb move. As someone will no doubt point out, I am making a class consciousness argument here. But it's not a Marxist one. That branch of dissent has been completely co-opted. You won't find many factory workers marching under the hammer and sickle these days. It's all college kids with enough time to LARP between classes. Keeps them busy and distracted until they're recruited into the managerial class. Though even that is kind of iffy these days. If they read less Marx and more Turchin, they might start getting worried. But I started this talking about Peacemaker, a DC Comics property, which naturally invites comparisons to the Marvel movies and their take on the subject, which is a more straight-up amplification of the super evil Mythos personified in the Red Skull. The occult aspects of Nazism are tied in. He's sort of a Nazi wizard, so evil he turns on his own people.
Berlin is on this map.
So it is.
And he leaves behind Hydra, an organization that corrupts everything it touches. But there's something else that is uncomfortable, probably inadvertent on the part of the writers, but central to our current times. The Red Skull returns in Avengers Endgame, not as his old supervillain self, but as a keeper of something necessary. It's not a redemption, but rather a reintegration of something lost.
What you seek lies in front of you, as does what you fear.
Because some of the things that are associated with the Nazis, nationalism, cultural pride, a sense of belonging to and uniqueness of a people, a willingness to defend your people against dangers, these things are essential to the health and survival of a civilization. We've reached a point where some strains of Western liberalism have almost entirely purged themselves of these essential traits. The self-loathing for past sins, the knee-jerk deferring to any culture other than their own, whether in the form of open borders or downplaying crimes to avoid appearing racist. Liberalism, once a great strength of our civilization, has developed a cancer. The openness to debate and new ideas has mutated into a self-destructive impulse. So when the young men that are the most targeted by that civilizational autoimmune disease see those traits of pride, brotherhood, fighting together for the good of their tribe, they recognize it as something essential that must be reclaimed. And while the Allies had those things too, the young men that gravitate toward the German side of the war do so in part because the people that talk about how uniquely and irredeemably evil the Nazis were are the same people that equate them with Nazis. It's kind of the enemy of my enemy is my friend mixed in with a hefty dose of fuck you transgressive youthful rebellion. But it's easy to get misdirected. Nazism is the packaging, the warped ideology of totalitarianism, aggressive imperialism, and genocidal hate wrapped around that vital core of national pride, collective purpose, and cultural vitality. Back to the Marvel example, the Red Skull is guarding the Soul Stone. They're connected. But the heroes don't need the Red Skull. They need the stone. He just happens to be the gatekeeper when they get there. And that's where we are. That's where the current generation of World War II study, examination, revisionism, is struggling to find answers. There's a ghost standing in the way of something vital that has to be reclaimed. Conversing with it is a step on the right path, but getting distracted and following the ghost into the wasteland is probably what the current crop of corrupt kleptocrats is hoping will do. I would much rather take back what we need to restore the pride and vitality of Western civilization, while the Nazi ghost quietly fades away on the wind. The sun keeps peeking out and roasting the forehead of doom here.